Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Richard, who is a beginning photographer from Canada. Metadata, Canon Rebel XTI, effective focal length 120 millimeters, exposure trio, ISO 1000, f2.8, and 1/15th of a second. Paraphrasing Richard's backstory here, Richard says that he went to a Roadhouse bar to photograph a band. He said he was using flash to do that, and then looked into this alcove area of the bar where people were shooting pool, turned the flash off, shot some quick impromptu portraits of people shooting pool, and this was his favorite shot. The questions and comments, Richard has a question about vertical orientation here and having all this negative space at the top part of the shot. He says he liked it because the dark, he felt like, gave a context for the dramatic lighting pattern in the lower part of the shot. Richard also has a question about the amount of red and says he's open to any other suggestions I might have for alternative versions of the image. Let's get into it. One of the things that I love about Richard's backstory, something that I've talked about a lot in all of my teaching on the Daily Critique for the last few years. I've talked a lot about this concept of taking breaks in your assignment shooting and looking around, looking behind you, looking up, looking down. I know in my own work I've found so much of the time that the assignment is the thing that gives me the permission to show up and be a photographer. So much of the time the best shots actually come from serendipity. After I'm there and I'm doing my work, then there's something serendipitous, and we can increase the potential for serendipity to become the icing on our cake as photographers by remembering to take breaks, stop occasionally, and also remembering to look in different ways, to look at different things, to look behind us, to look up, to look down. So I love that part of Richard's backstory. Another thing that I really enjoy about this image, and it could be a powerful takeaway, particularly when you may be shooting in a situation where there's a lot of subject matter. You may feel frustrated by the density of the subject matter. You may feel overwhelmed. It's too complicated, too busy. I love the way that Richard has created a foreground out of a glass on a table here, and he's using a longer focal length and shooting wide open on this lens to include this, throw it out of focus so it simplifies, and we have a foreground here that really creates some nice texture and layer of story that makes this photograph more interesting. You know, we can really tie ourselves into all kinds of boxes creatively as photographers. If we think foreground, we can think, well, wide angle shot and really sharp foreground leading out of the detail of a background. In cinema, you'll see over and over again foreground subjects so much of the time are just suggested and they are out of focus, and it's just another layer of information. So I really encourage you to think about foreground in this kind of a way in these types of scenarios. Another thing I love about the shot is the real dimensional lighting and how contrast, dark background, and this rim lighting effect is really drawing our eye to the main subject, creating a lot of a feeling of form as a design principle, that there's depth here, not just X movement and Y movement in the image. Great moment too. I mean, clearly this is a really great moment in terms of the implication of energy and also fantastic color. Green and red really playing very nice here on the X-axis in the image. One of the things I think about right away in my workflow, and most of the time I'm doing this in the raw converter, is thinking about color balance, white balance. Are there color casts that are robbing the image of color depth and imagery depth? And I feel like there's a color cast here, sort of the yellow orange variety, and I would like to get rid of that. And so here's a layer where I just got rid of some of the overall feeling of yellow and orange to create more color separation. There's before and there is after. Now working inside of the frame, there are a couple of other basic things that I think about, and I've kind of done these in a rough way. One of the things that I think about is the idea of getting a little bit more light on the face of the portrait subject. We see a suggestion of the same rim lighting here that is happening here and here and here in a very dramatic way. And I would like to, in Photoshop, add that to the face. I'd like to cut down a little bit of the light on the ear, cut down a little bit of light on the arm, draw more attention to the gaze, the intense gaze of his face, because there's some detail there. Another thing that I think about doing here is bringing out color depth even more. I feel like this is really interesting in terms of the imagery itself and the movement of the line, but that's very saturated red, and I kind of want to turn the saturation down on that red and let the shirt be the most saturated thing. And I see potential for blue here And that excites me from a color theory standpoint because of color triads. I can push the idea of the three colors of light: red, green, and blue, and I probably would try to bring up some blue. So here are just a whole series of changes. I've just said all changes besides the color balance on one layer. Here's before, and here is after. When I get to here, then I start to think about the vertical orientation and then possibly some other variations just based on different camera positions. I can appreciate Richard's idea of having this negative space up here to give more context to this. It's a classic bit of design principle where we can use an area that's not the most important part to make another part of the image more exciting. Have a lot of dark and just a little bit of light. It's a classic use of proportion as a design principle. I feel like there's a lot of information up here in this shot. It's funny because we could think about a crop. What happens for me when I crop this image is that if I say maybe I don't need quite as much negative space at the top and I come down to somewhere in here, then for me what that does is it starts to give me a real strong feeling of being limited overall in the shot. There's a real strong implication of movement, and this square crop starts to really make it feel more boxed in. So I don't want to do that here, and I'll just back up to the previous crop. What this really makes me think about is possibly more of a pulled back shot altogether, where Richard would go up and he would include a lot of the dark up here to make this bright and dramatic lit part more exciting by having a lot more dark negative space. But zooming wider and shooting this in a looser way and also shooting horizontal, my tendency, I believe, here would have been to go to horizontal, just from the classic standpoint of the implied energy in the shot is so strong on the x-axis. And again, thinking about the idea of dynamic proportion and using a little bit of the most exciting thing and a lot of least exciting things. Red is so powerful from a value standpoint, from a color idea, and I could see having a lot more green and going horizontal like this. The other thing that this image makes me think about is a classic cinema shot, an over-the-shoulder shot, where Richard goes to a shorter focal length, still playing around with shallow depth of field. We come over here, might need to get permission to do this from the people that are playing pool, shoot over the shoulder and shoot in a dynamic way. So we've got a horizontal that looks like this. Pool shooter is in one corner or the other, and we're kind of playing a diagonal. They're out of focus, and here we see the pool cue, see the table going away on a diagonal, and maybe waiting for a moment in the background where we have the same kind of feeling, dark in the foreground, moving to brighter in the background, but maybe in the background there's a payoff, there's another person, there's an expression, there's another groupo of people at a bar that's further away, and there's something really interesting happening back there, and the pool shooting is leading us out to that. One of the things that happens for me in this shot is that I love the layer here, I love what's happening here, but then I hit this background and it's just a visual stop. There's not feeling a movement of line that suggests more depth. So those are just some suggestions in terms of maybe alternative versions based on camera position while we're there. I love where Richard starts here. I love the idea of taking a break, taking advantage of serendipity. I love the dimensional lighting. Really great moment here. I love the idea of using a dark area of the scene and of the situation to make the drama of the dimensional lighting in the lower part of the shot even more dramatic. I want to say a big thank you to Richard for sharing this image with us. Thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on The Mindful Eye.